During our Christmas dinner, my son handed me a glass of water, which seemed pretty ordinary at the time. Fast forward an hour later, and there I was, hands shaking, dialing 911 in his kitchen. What I stumbled upon was not just a buried family secret. It was a plotted murder worth $2 million, and the target was yours truly. The whole web of deceit began right there at the dinner table, which is often where these stories start. The centerpiece was an elaborate mix of pine branches and glittering ornaments, so dense it was hard to see the person across from you. In my case, that person was my son, David. The table was heaped with enough food to feed an army, spotlighting a gorgeously roasted turkey shimmering beneath the glow of the chandelier. The setting was idyllic, almost suspiciously so. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, raised her wine glass high, her fingers sparkling with diamonds that caught the light beautifully, casting rainbows. "Here's to us," she proclaimed in her smooth, silky voice. "To family, to success, and a fabulous Christmas." David chimed in with his well-practiced broad smile, but his eyes told a different story. They were empty. "To success," he echoed, locking eyes with me. "It's been a great year for the firm. We just landed the Henderson account." I nodded and took a careful sip of my water as he bragged about the Henderson account. It did sound impressive, but after 40 years as a forensic accountant, I was seasoned at spotting numbers that didn't add up. My career had been built on uncovering financial truths, and my son's life was teeming with financial illusions. Truth was, his firm was nothing more than him and his laptop in a leased office nook. Just half a year earlier, he came to me with shame written all over his face, asking for a $50,000 loan, calling it a bridge loan for some unmissable opportunity. Naturally, I handed over the money. What else was I to do? Every parent assures themselves this time will be the different one, the turning point. Still, as I listened to them chat about their upcoming trip to Aspen and the new Lexus parked outside, I did the math in my head. That $50,000 was long gone, just as I suspected. But this lavish display was on another level. The watch on David's wrist was worth at least $10,000. Chloe's dress was from a fashion house I recognized because my late wife used to dream about owning one. Their show of wealth was outrageously extravagant. That's when I felt it. A dull ache in my chest, like an invisible hand, was clutching at my heart. I put my fork down, and suddenly the world started to spin, turning the chandelier into a single, blinding light. I took another sip of water, hoping it would help. "It's just stress," I told myself. "The holidays tend to bring on stress. The rich meals, the emotional toll of seeing my son living this absurd lie. I figured it was indigestion, but the tightness in my chest only got worse, like something was slowly tightening its grip." "Are you all right, Dad?" David asked, his voice laced with what seemed like genuine concern. I forced a smile, nodding. "I'm all right," I said, "just a bit worn out." I turned to Chloe. "The meal is wonderful," I complimented her. She grinned with satisfaction. "Oh, it's nothing, Jacob. We're so glad you could be with us tonight." The room suddenly felt like it was closing in. The scents of pine and roasted meat were overpowering. I needed some time to clear my head. "If you'll excuse me," I said, putting my napkin back on the table. "I think I could use some fresh water." I felt my legs wobble as I got to my feet. Walking towards the kitchen, I was keenly aware of eyes boring into my back. The seemingly short hallway now felt like it stretched on forever, and the polished hardwood beneath me seemed to shift as I moved. I clung to the kitchen door frame like a lifeline, entering a space that could have been lifted straight from a glossy magazine, stainless steel and spotless counters everywhere. But just like their picture-perfect life, it was all surface level. In the corner sat a haphazard pile of mail, teetering dangerously close to the edge. As I reached for a glass, my sleeve grazed the stack, And that tiny touch was all it took to send papers fluttering to the ground like fallen leaves in autumn. Great, I grumbled under my breath while crouching down to pick them up, sifting through pricey-looking bills mixed in with the junk. Among the usual pile of flyers and advertisements, department store discounts, a sleek car brochure, there was one envelope that caught my eye. Prudential Insurance stared back at me through the plastic window, my name and address plainly visible. I hadn't been in touch with Prudential for over a decade, and seeing it now caused my already jittery heart to pound harder. I grabbed the envelope, quickly noticing it was already torn open. Every instinct, every lesson I'd learned, screamed at me that something was off. This wasn't a piece of mail meant for me, or maybe it was, but for reasons I couldn't yet fathom. David, my son, must have opened it unintentionally, or perhaps intentionally. I knew looking through his things was crossing a line, but the father in me, filled with anxiety, overrode everything else. My hands trembled as I pulled out the contents. It wasn't just any letter. It was a policy confirmation. Under the intense kitchen light, the words jumped out at me like a punch. A life insurance policy worth $2 million, taken out just 3 weeks ago, and guess who was named the beneficiary? David Peterson, my son. The room suddenly closed in around me, the air thickening like syrup, and a sharp pain pierced my chest. A $2 million policy on my life. The sense of betrayal was so strong, I feared my legs would give way. My mind began racing, piecing together the puzzle. David's enormous debts, the fabricated tales of success, the lavish spending. It was all a charade. He wasn't just in financial trouble. He was overwhelmed. Dizziness hit me like a tidal wave, stronger and colder than before. I needed something to brace myself. Then I noticed something by the sink. A half-empty bottle of Fiji water I'd been drinking when I arrived. David had given it to me, saying, "Stay hydrated, Dad," with a grin. Right next to it, partially hidden by a marble salt shaker, was a small, unlabeled vial, nearly empty and tiny, but with just enough liquid left inside to send a chill down my spine. It all fit together in a single, terrifying moment. The unexplained sickness, the tightness in my chest, the life insurance policy, the vial, my son giving me water. This wasn't just stress. It was potentially something far more sinister. Panic surged through me, desperate to shatter the illusion of a merry holiday. But years of experience kicked in. I'd dealt with con artists and criminals before, knew better than to let emotions take over. Show any sign of distress, and you're done for. Gradually, my breath steadied, a frigid clarity settling over me. This wasn't just family drama. It was a crime scene, and I was the sole, and perhaps solitary, witness. I moved with purpose, every action precise. Noticed a security camera tucked in the ceiling corner. I had to act natural, avoid raising any flags. Carefully, I slipped the document back into its envelope, leaving it on the counter. Then, as calmly as possible, I pocketed the vial, treating it like the crucial evidence it was. So, there I was, making my way over to the fridge. I snagged a water bottle, still sealed, and twisted it open, breaking the quiet of the kitchen with that unmistakable crackling plastic sound. I drank greedily, hoping to clear my mind and wash away whatever might be lingering in me. After a breather, I gathered myself, straightened my shirt, ran my fingers through my hair, and settled my expression into one of calm. I was as ready as I'd ever be. I headed back to the dining room, bathed in that cozy warm glow, stepping back into the tangled mess of deceit. Chloe, displaying her perfect smile, asked me if I was feeling any better. I glanced beyond the overly festive centerpiece on the table and caught David's gaze. He was staring right back, and there was something. Trying to decipher the depths in my son's eyes felt impossible. I plastered a smile on my face, more of a grim smirk, really. "Much better, thanks," I said, keeping my tone steady. The sip of water had helped. Satisfied, he nodded and returned to his meal. Still, I kept my eyes on him, this boy who looked so much like mine, but felt different. He had no clue that things had changed. He thought he was the predator, closing in on his prey. Little did he know, I'd spotted the trap he'd set for me. I wasn't his prey anymore. I had become the man ready to bring everything in his world down around him. I was the most dangerous presence in that room, my silent vow to pick up the fight. That night drive home felt like the longest 15 minutes ever. With every set of headlights, I felt accused, while every roadside shadow seemed to loom threateningly around me. With clenched hands on the steering wheel, my knuckles turned white. In my pocket was a small vial, a chill of glass that anchored me back to the painful truth of my son's betrayal. I didn't bother with the radio. Dead silence was my comfort zone now, a place to sift through the chaos of the evening, not as a clear storyline but in scattered and jagged fragments. Once I parked at my driveway, I didn't rush out of the car. I took a moment, listening to the engine tick away. I looked at my house where I'd raised David, where my wife and I had built decades of memories. It was almost like it was looking back at me. Inside, I turned the lock, sliding the deadbolt in place. That click of metal was the first sane thing I'd felt in hours. I roamed through the dark and quiet rooms, my hand brushing against the walls. I didn't want to switch on the lights. I wanted to avoid the photos, the ghosts of what was supposed to be a happy family that I realized was more of a mirage. In the kitchen, I put the vial down on the counter under the blaring light, inspecting it like it was some otherworldly object. My gut reaction was to grab the phone and dial 911, to blurt out that my son, my only child, had tried to kill me for money. But the practical side of me, the accountant who built a career on undeniable facts, took over. Without concrete proof, all I'd have were empty accusations. It would be my word against his, and that could easily be dismissed as the ramblings of a possibly senile old man going against a well-liked, successful son. This wasn't just a story I needed to tell, I needed a solid case, and there was only one person I could rely on to help with that. I skipped over David's name in my contacts without a second thought and called Michael Vance, my lawyer and longtime friend. He picked up after just a couple of rings, his voice tired with sleep. "Jacob, it's almost midnight. What's going on?" "Things are far from fine, Michael," I replied, my voice sounding disconnected and distant. I laid it all out for him, right from the dinner with all its sinister undertones to the vial now sitting on my kitchen counter. I recounted it all in a detached manner, just the straight facts. The $2 million insurance policy, the sudden chest pain, the water bottle, and the vial. I glossed over the emotional weight, that heart-wrenching agony of it all. I just delivered the facts. There was a pause that seemed to stretch on forever. I could just barely hear his wife, asking if everything was all right. At last, Michael's voice broke the silence, sounding sharp and focused. "Jacob, pay close attention. Don't touch that vial again. Don't wash your hands. Put it in a sealed plastic bag. Tomorrow morning, be at St. Joseph's ER right at 8 a.m. Tell them you're experiencing chest pain and dizziness, and you're worried you might have ingested something. Mention your heart condition. They'll take you more seriously. You need a comprehensive blood test and make sure they do a toxicology screen. I'll get in touch with someone at the hospital to make sure it's handled correctly. Don't go to the police yet. Let's gather our own evidence first. We'll build a case they won't be able to dismiss." His instructions felt like a lifeline, offering clarity and direction in a world that had suddenly become chaotic and confusing. "All right, Michael, I'll do it." Then, more softly, he added, "Jacob, I'm so sorry." I ended the call and followed Michael's advice, using tweezers to carefully place the vial into a Ziploc bag. That night, sleep was a distant memory. I sat in my armchair, keeping vigil as the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing hour. Its chimes were like milestones of determination. When morning finally came, I found myself at St. Joseph's Hospital in the emergency room. The harsh fluorescent lights and the crisp smell of antiseptic were a stark contrast to the festive decorations I'd seen the night before. I stuck to Michael's plan to the letter. I laid out my symptoms, made sure to mention my heart condition, and acted concerned that I might have accidentally taken the wrong medication. They quickly took me in, hooking me up to various machines. A young doctor came in, his face etched with concern. He listened intently before ordering tests. Blood was drawn, questions were asked. I felt detached from it all, like an actor reciting a script written for me. I answered truthfully, but kept the deeper betrayal to myself. Hours ticked by before the doctor returned, looking at a chart with a puzzled expression. "Mr. Peterson, we found something unusual," he said, starting to explain. "Your EKG results are atypical, and your blood work is confusing. We found amiodarone, a strong antiarrhythmic drug, in your system. Is this something you're supposed to be taking?" "No, not at all," I responded calmly. "I only take a low-dose beta blocker." He glanced back at the paperwork, frowning. "This is a substantial dose for someone with your heart condition who isn't under regular monitoring. Such a dose could easily induce a cardiac event that would seem entirely natural." There it was. The method, the strategy. A heart attack so well calculated that it would match my medical history perfectly. My son had done his research. The chill of that realization was more biting than the hospital's air conditioning. With the toxicology report in hand, clinical and clear in its betrayal, I left the hospital. The report was tucked into my coat alongside the tiny plastic bag containing the vial. I had all the pieces: a $2 million insurance policy, the means, amiodarone, and proof, a hospital report confirming the drug in my bloodstream. Michael had built an impregnable fortress. At home, I spread out the pieces on my kitchen table: the insurance policy, the bagged vial, the toxicology report. This unholy trinity lay before me, a testament to my son's avarice, cruelty, and disregard for my life, spelled out starkly in black and white. No room left for doubt or for a father's wishful thinking that it was all a misunderstanding. Only the cold, hard truth remained. I picked up the phone, but there was no hurried call to 911. My anger had transformed into something colder: precision. When I finally connected with the operator, my voice was steady and clear. "I need to report a crime," I said. "It's a case of life insurance fraud." There was a brief pause on the line. "Sir, could you clarify?" she asked. "Certainly," I replied, glancing at the evidence spread before me. "My son took out a $2 million life insurance policy on me without my consent. I have solid reasons and medical evidence to believe he attempted to expedite the claim by threatening my life." I gave her my name, address, and my son's name with the assurance of someone who had undeniable proof. I wasn't a heartbroken father or a victim in panic. I was like a forensic investigator, wrapping up a case that was as good as solved. A couple of days after I made my phone call, my doorbell chimed. Standing there was a man who wore the marks of a tough life. Around his mid-50s, he had a weary look about him, a suit that had seen better days, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Flashing a badge, he introduced himself in a rough voice. "Detective Miller." "I'm here about your report," he stated. I showed him into my living room. He trudged in with a sort of tired heaviness, his eyes quietly taking in every detail of the room. We were surrounded by family photos, a worn-out armchair, and the simple, predictable routine of my life. I could almost hear his inner thoughts, even though he didn't voice them. Another family drama, he likely thought. An old man mixed up in some squabble over money, making mountains out of molehills. He'd probably already stuck my case in the typical category. My job now was to convince him otherwise. Rather than offering him a cup of coffee, I led him straight to the dining room table. "Let me show you what I've got," I suggested. He seemed a bit taken aback, but followed me anyway. On the table, I'd arranged the crucial parts of my case. On the left sat the insurance policy, filled with its cold, detached jargon. In the middle was the hospital's toxicology report, clearly showing poison had been involved. And on the right was a small glass vial, still preserved in an evidence bag. Detective Miller stopped by the table, examining the items before looking back at me. Suddenly, his tired expression shifted to one of keen interest. Instead of the emotional story he was expecting, I laid out what looked like a case file. He addressed me as Mr. Peterson, a shift in his tone from routine to respectful, asking, "Talk me through this, would you?" So I did just that. For the next hour, I carefully explained everything that had unfolded during our Christmas dinner. I didn't get upset or raise my voice. I presented the details as if I were talking about a dodgy expense claim to a corporate board. I indicated the policy as the motive, the vial as how it was done, and the hospital report as the method. With my background as a forensic accountant, I'd built my career on detecting deception, and here, the signs stood out like a sore thumb. I laid out David's phony show of wealth, the elaborate lies, and the undeniable desperation that had been simmering for a while. It wasn't a sudden decision, just what happens when someone's finances spin out of control. Miller soaked up everything quietly, barely interrupting. He picked up the vial, examined it under the light, and read the toxicology report with a serious intensity. Once I'd finished, he leaned back and sized me up. "In my line of work," he eventually said, "most cases boil down to emotions. Anger, jealousy, greed. They're usually messy. But this," he gestured to the table, "this is clear, planned." And that's when I knew he took what I said seriously. The dynamics changed. Suddenly I was no longer just some older guy who couldn't handle family squabbles. I was a credible source. Detective Miller and his partner spent the next 2 hours methodically collecting evidence, asking precise questions with a professionalism that gave me some comfort in such a trying time. Before he left, Miller handed me his card. "We're going to look into your son's financials," he assured me. "If your thoughts are right, the figures won't deceive us. I'll keep you informed." 3 days later, the call came. "Jacob," Miller began, cutting through the usual formalities by using my first name, "we've started digging, and it's even worse than you suspected." I sank into my armchair, phone pressed to my ear, as he revealed the shadowy financial missteps my son had been hiding. That so-called wealth was supported by a shaky pile of debts. Miller read through the numbers like a grim judgment. A whopping $150,000 racked up on 8 different credit cards, a second mortgage draining their home's worth, and the final nail, a $60,000 loan from a private lender in Philadelphia. "This isn't a typical bank," Miller noted gravely. "It's a loan shark. Their interest rates are sky high, and the payment came due last week. Your son was cornered with no obvious exit." The vacations in Aspen, the luxury cars, Chloe's high-end wardrobe, they were all part of a desperate act to keep a crumbling illusion alive. That $2 million insurance policy wasn't merely an opportunity, it was their only potential lifeline. The motive wasn't a wild guess anymore. It became a straightforward matter of numbers. "We talked to them this morning," Miller continued. "And what did they say?" I asked, though deep down, the answer was already lurking in the back of my mind. Miller laughed a bit sarcastically. "Chloe pulled a move right out of a soap opera, complete with crying the second she sat down. I checked around and found an order for the exact amount of amiodarone, all delivered to David's address. Feeling betrayed hit me hard, a mix of triumph that I'd figured it out and deep sadness over how far they'd gone. When I first confronted Chloe, she brushed it off, saying it was just a giant misunderstanding. She insisted they got that insurance policy to make sure I would be taken care of when I got older, like a safety net. She went on about how I'd been forgetful, mixing things up here and there, hinting that maybe I needed a medical checkup. It was like she was trying to make me seem senile, a really nasty classic move. David? He reacted like the angry, loyal son. He was all outraged, defending their love for me, even talked about suing the department for bothering us. He swore up and down that I was everything to him and he couldn't believe I'd suspect them. He claimed he found that vial in the park, saying he picked it up so a kid wouldn't get hurt. I gotta admit, it was quite the act. And for a moment, I questioned myself. Was I just a paranoid old man imagining things? But then, I remembered the clarity I felt in the kitchen. Couldn't deny all those years of lies. I wasn't making this up. This was their biggest lie yet. "They're lying, detective," I stated firmly. My voice didn't waver. Miller nodded back. "Their stories are smooth, but those little details, they don't add up. They're counting on us just seeing a grieving family, but I see two people plotting together." The problem was, without any confession, this case was tricky. A clever lawyer could argue there's reasonable doubt about the vial. They could claim I accidentally mixed up my own meds. That's why Miller had reached out to me. He had the case ready to go, but he needed the full picture. The details only I could share were vital. I had to give him the ammo to dismantle their story. "Detective," I began, my mind sifting through memories filled with broken promises. "Let me give you the story of my son's financial history. Ask about the $50,000 I lent him 6 months ago for what he called a foolproof tech investment. I have the bank records. Nothing came back." I could hear Miller typing away. "And grill Chloe about her handbag business from a couple of years back. Check out the bankruptcy records. Lots of small-time suppliers got stiffed." Miller encouraged me, and I went on. "A decade ago, my late wife's pearl necklace disappeared. David claimed he knew nothing until I saw it in a pawn shop in Trenton. I have the receipt from when I purchased it back. I didn't confront him then. My wife was too sick for that stress. But I kept the receipt. I was uncovering our family's hidden mess. Reliving these moments was tough, reminded me of my own blind spots. But now, each memory was a weapon in my hands." "One last thing, detective. Ask David about the trust fund my wife left him. He spent it all in 6 months on a sports car and trips to Monaco. He was 25. I've got the bank statements. It's a pattern, reckless behavior, lies, for years." I paused, my heart heavy after exposing my son's failures. It wasn't easy, but it was the truth. The line was quiet for a moment. When Miller spoke again, his tone had shifted. No more professional distance. He was determined. "Thanks, Jacob. That's the backup we need. They think they're playing chess with an old guy, but they don't know they're up against a master." Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got the call from Detective Miller. He sounded charged up, almost excited. "We nailed it, Jacob," he said. "Got the smoking gun." I clenched the phone, needing to know more. "What did you find?" It was about the drug, amiodarone. Not easy to get without a prescription, but not impossible. We checked those shady online pharmacies and tracked an order, the exact amount delivered right to David's place. We finally tracked down a transaction linked to a Canadian website, and it led us to a P.O. box that's barely 20 meters away from your son's place. This happened about 5 weeks ago. Before I even asked, I knew they wouldn't be using their own credit card for this. No chance of that. And sure enough, Miller confirmed it for me. A prepaid Visa card, bought with cash from a 7-Eleven. They thought they were being slick, leaving no evidence. but they slipped up. The P.O. box was registered under a fake name, but the application had been submitted online, leaving an IP trail that led us to a coffee shop just a couple of blocks from David's office. And there's security footage showing him in the cafe with his laptop at the exact time the application was made. On top of that, the shipping info shows the package arrived a week before Christmas. Jacob, we've got more than enough proof. The traps snapped shut on them. A wave hit me, not exactly relief, but more a harsh realization. That last glimmer of hope, the irrational wish of a father clinging to the idea of another explanation, disappeared completely. It was just the cold, unforgiving truth now. So, they'll be arrested soon? I asked. We're processing the warrants now, Miller said. We can bring them in tonight. This moment of justice finally arrived, but I had a different plan brewing in my mind for days. Just arresting them wouldn't be enough. That would be someone else's job. I wanted them to really understand the gravity of what they'd done, to see the full consequences of their actions. They needed to realize they were cornered, not just plucked off the chessboard by someone else. Detective, I began, making sure my voice stayed firm. I have a request. Can you hold off on the arrest for 24 hours? Miller paused. Jacob, this is critical. Why delay? We've got everything we need, he said. Because I need to make one last move, I told him. It's not for your case, it's for mine. They need to see the impact of what they've done, not just on me, but on themselves too. Please. I heard him heave a sigh, a mix of frustration and reluctant acceptance. Okay, Jacob. Against my better judgment, you have until 3 p.m. tomorrow, but that's the limit. As soon as I hung up the phone, I called my lawyer. Michael, it's time. Within an hour, Michael was in touch with David's attorney, pitching a crafty scheme. He talked about my age, my fragile health, and how this whole situation was putting enormous stress on me. He painted a picture of a lonely, regretful father who might have acted rashly and now dreaded seeing his son caught up in a police scandal. He proposed a meeting, one last chance for peace, a shot at discussing everything outside the harsh glare of legal procedures. Just as Michael expected, they were intrigued. Their lawyer got back to us quickly. David and Chloe were, understandably, hurt by the accusation, but were open to meeting. They cared for their father and wanted to clear their names and mend the family rift. They agreed to meet at Michael's office the next day at noon. They thought they were stepping into a negotiation, thinking they could persuade an allegedly confused old man to change his account of the story. Little did they know, they were walking into the lion's den. The next day, I found myself in the conference room of Michael's law firm, a room that spoke of authority and permanence. The walls were dark mahogany, lined with rows of leather-bound law volumes, giving off a scent of dust and power. The table, one huge polished piece of wood, seemed as solid as the building it was housed in. This room was a stark contrast to the shaky foundation of my son's world. This place was all about delivering consequences. I sat at the end of a long table with Michael by my side. My role was to remain silent and steady. David and Chloe arrived right on time. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, looking both anxious and determined. Chloe was in a simple but elegant outfit, her face an image of heart-wrenching beauty. They seemed like a couple shattered, bound together by a family tragedy they were now forced to confront head-on. They both gave me a solemn nod. David, the father, spoke up next, his voice dripping with fake sentiment. Thanks for doing this. I really believe we can resolve it. They settled into their seats across from us. Their lawyer, a slick man in a ridiculously expensive suit, began a speech about the importance of family and how misunderstandings can happen when people are stressed out. His words just kind of washed over me. I wasn't really taking them in. My eyes were glued to my son, and the woman he'd married, but there was no emotional stir, nothing mad or sad about it. It felt like a quiet door had finally clicked shut for good. Once their lawyer was done, Michael leaned forward and dropped a chunky, blue-covered folder right on the table. It landed with a dull, intentional thump. "Thanks for coming, both of you," Michael started, keeping his voice even and steady. "You might have heard Jacob's been through the ringer lately. This whole situation really made him rethink his life, not just right now, but looking ahead." David and Chloe exchanged a quick, confident glance, thinking this was their chance, that the old man was finally going to cave. But Michael skipped over the run-ins with the police, the hospital stint, the vial, even the insurance angles. He just kept things calm and measured. "This actually kicked off about 6 months back. David, you might remember hitting up your dad for a big loan. Wasn't it like $50,000? David wriggled uncomfortably in his chair, a flicker of annoyance flitting across his face. "What does that have to do with this? That was just a private family matter." "Sure," Michael nodded smoothly. "But for Jacob, it sparked a big wake-up call. It got him really thinking about his estate, about securing his legacy for the future. He got concerned about financial stability and wanted to make sure his life's work was handled smartly." Michael flipped open the blue folder. Instead of a police record, there lay a trust agreement. "So, 6 months ago," Michael continued, "Jacob came to me, and we redid his will and assets. Everything he owns, his house, savings, investments, the whole shebang worth around $8 million, was transferred into a new, watertight trust." The room went dead silent. David and Chloe's self-assured grins started to curl into confusion. This wasn't the conversation they'd rehearsed in their heads. "It turns out the Jacob Peterson Legacy Trust was meant for you, David. When your father passes," Michael explained, locking eyes with my son, "you're the sole beneficiary named." Relief washed over David's face, thinking he had dodged a major bullet. He reckoned this was just my old-school method of keeping him in check. He didn't realize yet. He hadn't seen the jaws closing in. Michael allowed the gravity of the moment to settle in the air before unveiling the final twist. "However," he added, tapping a particular section with his finger, "out of concern, your father had a very strict and binding special clause put in." Michael let his words hang in the air, the phrase "special clause" bouncing around in the silence. I watched my son's expression. The confusion was still there, but shifting toward suspicion. Chloe shot a glance at their lawyer, silently asking what was up, but the lawyer looked as baffled as they were. They were unknowingly caught up in a game whose rules were yet to be revealed, but not for much longer. Michael cleared his throat, not for drama, but because he was about to unleash a game-changer. With a calmness akin to a judge about to deliver a harsh sentence, he adjusted his glasses and focused on the document. "This clause can be found in Article 4, Section B," he read, voice echoing like a dreaded legal reminder. "It states, if the primary beneficiary, David Peterson, is found guilty of any state or federal felony offense, this trust is dissolved immediately." Michael paused, allowing the first part of the trap to snap into place. David's lawyer blinked in surprise. "A felony clause? That's rare but not unheard of." David let out a dry, nervous laugh. "A felony? Seriously, I'm not a criminal. What's this about?" He turned to me, his eyes searching for some logic. "Dad, this is nuts. What's really going on here?" I didn't say a word. I just kept watching. I was there to witness the final chapter play out. The figures were being tallied. Michael lifted his hand to get everyone's focus. "Bear with me, please. Let me finish." He pressed on, eyes back on the documents. "There's an additional term," he continued. "If it's determined in a court of law or by a coroner's report that Jacob Peterson's death resulted, directly or indirectly, from the actions or conspiracy of the beneficiary, That beneficiary immediately forfeits any rights to the inheritance. He raised his eyes to lock with David's. And here's the final part, he added with a solemn note. If any of these terms are met, the Jacob Peterson Legacy Trust will be completely dissolved, with all funds going unrestricted to the National Center for Victims of Financial Fraud. For about 30 seconds, the room was filled with an awkward silence, the air conditioner being the only sound. David and Chloe stared at Michael, their faces showing disbelief and shock, as if he had been speaking a different language. They were trying to wrap their heads around this unexpected turn, finding it hard to match it with their own belief that they were in control, thinking they could just talk their way out of this mess. Chloe was the first to lose her cool. Her mask of sorrow slipped as she stammered, I don't understand. What does this mean, Jacob? Why would you do this?" David was the one who finally caught on. His face, previously drained of all color, flushed in anger. The truth hit him hard, not gently but like a punch. He slammed his fists on the table, making everyone jump. "This is some kind of trick," he yelled, his voice shaky with fear and rage. "He's just trying to scare us. This can't be done. This is my inheritance, my right by birth." He pointed a finger at me. "He's lost his mind. This proves it. No court is going to back this up. We'll fight it." Michael stayed steady, leaning back in his chair with a calm that couldn't be shaken. "Actually, David," he said softly but deliberately, "the trust can't be changed. It was signed and witnessed half a year ago. There's a signed statement from your dad's doctor from the same day, confirming he was thinking clearly without any pressure. Plus, there's a video of the signing. Trust me, it's foolproof." David's fight faded away, leaving him looking defeated and deflated. He sank back into his chair. He got it now. They both did. I watched as they came to realize they were stuck in the trap I had carefully set for them. They had planned the perfect scheme to cause my death to look like a natural heart attack, hoping to collect a tidy $2 million from insurance before inheriting another $8 million. A $10 million payout. But they seriously underestimated me. They saw an old man, just a stepping stone. But they didn't see that I had 4 decades of outsmarting much sharper crooks. The real trap wasn't a police investigation. It wasn't a vial of poison. The real snare was this document, finalized 6 months prior. They were already caught before making a move. Their greed was their weak spot. They couldn't wait any longer. Their impatience led them to attempt insurance fraud, which would lead them to ruin. Even if, by some miracle, they dodged the attempted murder charges, a $2 million insurance scam is a severe federal crime. Once found guilty, the clause would kick in, and their $8 million share would disappear. They weren't really after a $10 million prize. They risked an inheritance they already had coming for just an extra $2 million a bit sooner, and lost it all. All those plans and schemes, completely unaware their downfall was already set in motion, just lying in ambush. Chloe broke down in tears, her usually calm exterior crumbling into soft, shuddering sobs as her world collapsed around her. David just stared at me, mouth slightly open, lost in thought. All the anger and bitterness were gone, leaving nothing but a hollow emptiness inside him. He finally understood his downfall clearly. The final strike played out in front of him. Just as the realization hit him, there was a firm knock on the conference room door. Michael looked over at me, and I nodded slightly. "Come in," Michael said. Detective Miller entered, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. The grave mood was suddenly interrupted by the imposing presence of the law stepping through the door. Miller's weary eyes landed on David and Chloe. Holding out his badge, not that he needed to, he spoke in a voice that left no room for argument. "David Peterson," he declared. "Chloe Peterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud." The officers moved in. A metallic snap sounded as they placed handcuffs on Chloe's wrists. She didn't resist. She was completely defeated. The second officer approached David, who remained seated, staring blankly. "All right, sir. Could you stand up and put your hands behind your back?" David, deep in his own thoughts, didn't even notice me at first. But when he finally looked my way, he didn't see a dad or someone he'd wronged. No, to him, I was the mastermind of his downfall. He fancied himself a clever chess player, but really, he was just a piece in my game. As they walked him out, his hands tied behind him, he stayed quiet. The fight was over, and the stage was empty. The room fell silent, just me and a blue folder sitting on the table, symbolizing the end of this chapter of my life. I didn't feel victorious or overjoyed, just a calm sense that this long, agonizing journey had reached its conclusion. It reinforced that while justice drags, it doesn't stop. Half a year after that disastrous holiday dinner, everything wrapped up quietly with the law. The evidence couldn't have been clearer. David and Chloe were guilty beyond any doubt. The jury didn't hesitate, and neither did the judge, who handed down strict sentences. There was nothing sensational, no dramatic confessions, just the solid sound of the gavel sealing their fate. About a week later, Michael rang me up, sounding all business. "It's done, Jacob," he said. "We've completed the transfer. All $8 million from the trust is now with the National Center for Victims of Financial Fraud." With that, everything was finally in order, the last loose ends tied up. I thanked Michael and hung up, sinking into the armchair that my wife used to joke was practically a part of me. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating specks of dust in the still air. You'd think I might feel something, maybe relief or a vengeful satisfaction, but I didn't. Instead, a serene quiet settled over me, much like that calm after a brutal storm when you're finally able to just breathe. Revenge? No, it's like a fire that consumes everything, including the one who starts it. What I did was more like solving an intricate puzzle, cold and necessary. It was the last audit of my life, righting wrongs and setting things back to how they should have been. Ordnung. The Germans have a word for it that means order and rightness. My thoughts drifted to David, not the man he'd become, but the boy I used to hold in my lap, the kid who clung to my hand, the teenager learning to drive, excited and terrified in equal measure. What happened to that boy? When did things start to go bad? Sitting alone in my quiet home, I couldn't ignore the harsh truth anymore. Maybe I'd been so wrapped up in fixing others' lives that I missed the void growing in my own son's soul. With all my quiet, disciplined ways, maybe I taught him to see worth only in numbers instead of... Back then, it was character and integrity that should have mattered most. I carried the weight of this guilt wherever I went, but I didn't offer him the poison. I wasn't the one who forged his signature on that insurance policy. I couldn't shield him from his own decisions, from walking the path he chose. What I lost, the relationship I'd cherished with him, once meant the world, and I'd mourned it long enough. I had to make peace with that, but I could at least stop him from going so far into darkness that he'd never return. What I did wasn't just to protect myself. It was about stopping him before he went past the point of no return and became a murderer. Weird as it sounds, it was one last fatherly act. I couldn't save the man he was, but maybe I saved a piece of who he used to be. As the sun began to set, casting the living room in warm shades of gold and orange, for the first time in what felt like forever, the house didn't seem so empty. It felt at peace. It felt like my own. My future wasn't weighed down by my son's expectations or his betrayals. What lay ahead was a new beginning. I walked over to my old wooden desk, which had been with me for over 40 years. Opening the top drawer, I pulled out a fresh checkbook tied to my personal savings. This was the money I'd put aside for retirement, separate from the family trust. When I looked back at the amount I now had, it seemed small compared to the fortune I'd given away, but at least it was truly mine. I opened my checkbook, feeling the blank checks held a new beginning. For years, money had created a rift between my son and me, becoming a weapon and a battlefield for our family. It symbolized greed, driving us to the brink of destruction. But when you look at it differently, money is just a tool. It can either destroy or create. With a newfound steadiness, I picked up my pen. Instead of donating to a huge, faceless charity, I paused and wrote out a check for a small local community college. It was enough to provide a full scholarship for a student eager to dive into accounting and learn the art of numbers. On the memo line, I wrote, "For integrity." I signed it, Jacob Peterson, with a firm hand. My signature was bold and confident, reflecting a man who knew his own worth, a value that wasn't tied to any bank balance. As I tore the check from the book, I didn't feel like I was mourning lost riches or a broken family. This was about investing in a new beginning, one where honesty and order had a place. As I navigated this path, I understood that real justice wasn't about revenge. It was about healing and making amends. It was about balancing the score to make positive change in the world, no matter how small. In the quiet of my home, as the evening settled in, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of a new chapter, a new journey with a fresh purpose. After what felt like ages, peace and acceptance wrapped around me. This story shows us that true strength isn't loud. It's the steady resolve of those who've been underestimated. It demonstrates that wisdom combined with patience is far more powerful than greed. The greatest justice doesn't come from seeking revenge, but through thoughtful acts of restoring balance and safeguarding dignity. Even when confronted by deep betrayal, there is space for new purpose, transforming pain into positive action. It's a profound reminder that one's true worth is defined by integrity, not by the wealth they amass.